Hi all friends, welcome my YouTube channel Storytime. Please don't forget like, subscribe and share. The story of Trojan War ends. The Trojan War had raged for 10 long years, leaving cities in ruins and heroes fallen. Among the Greek warriors, Odysseus, king of Ithaca, stood out not for brute strength but for his cunning and intelligence. It was he who conceived the idea of the Trojan horse, a deceptive gift that led to the Greeks' ultimate victory over Troy. As the war ended, the Greek forces prepared to return to their homes. Odysseus, longing to reunite with his wife, Penelope, and his young son, Telemachus, boarded his fleet of ships with his loyal men. Their spirits were high, for they believed their journey would be swift and their troubles over. But the gods had other plans. Unbeknownst to Odysseus, the destruction of Troy had angered the gods, especially Poseidon, the god of the sea. During the sacking of Troy, a temple dedicated to Poseidon had been desecrated, and the Greeks showed little remorse for their sacrilegious actions. Poseidon, known for his wrath, vowed that Odysseus would suffer before setting foot in Ithaca again. As the fleet sailed across the Aegean Sea, the first signs of trouble appeared. The winds that had carried them to Troy now turned against them, scattering their ships and sending them off course. Days turned into weeks as Odysseus and his men struggled to navigate the stormy waters. Provisions began to run low, and the morale of the crew wavered. In one of their rare moments of respite, the ships anchored near a small island. Here, Odysseus made offerings to the gods, hoping to appease them and secure safe passage. But no omens appeared, and the island offered little in the way of food or shelter. With heavy hearts, they set sail again, unsure of what lay ahead. Their next stop was the island of Ismarus, home to the Ciconies, allies of Troy. Driven by hunger and desperation, Odysseus and his men raided the city, taking supplies and treasures. But their victory was short-lived. The Ciconies rallied their forces and launched a counterattack. Many of Odysseus's men were slain, and those who survived barely escaped with their lives. As they sailed away from Ismarus, the mood aboard the ships was somber. Odysseus, burdened by the loss of his comrades, began to reflect on the choices that had led them to this point. He realized that the journey home would be far more challenging than he had anticipated. The fleet pressed on, navigating treacherous waters and battling fierce storms. Each day brought new challenges, and the men grew weary. Yet, through it all, Odysseus remained resolute. He reminded his crew of their shared goal, to return to Ithaca and reunite with their loved ones. But even Odysseus's determination could not prepare them for the trials that awaited. Their journey was not merely a test of endurance but a battle against forces beyond their comprehension. The gods themselves seemed to conspire against them, turning the sea into a relentless adversary. As the sun set on another difficult day, Odysseus stood at the bow of his ship, staring out at the endless horizon. In his heart, he prayed to Athena, the goddess of wisdom and war, who had always favored him. "Guide me, Athena," he whispered. "Grant me the strength to overcome these trials and return to my family." Little did he know, this was only the beginning of an epic journey that would test his courage, his loyalty, and his very identity. The trials of Odysseus would become the stuff of legend, a tale of human resilience and the enduring power of hope. After their narrow escape from the Ciconies, Odysseus and his men continued their perilous journey, but the trials were far from over. The sea, once a source of their livelihood and a path to their homes, had become their greatest enemy. The wrath of Poseidon loomed over them, though none of them yet understood the depth of the god's anger. As their fleet sailed further into uncharted waters, a fierce storm brewed, with waves towering like mountains and winds howling like wild beasts. The men struggled to keep the ships afloat. Some prayed to Zeus for mercy, while others, too exhausted to row, simply clung to the sides of the vessel, hoping the gods would spare them. Amid the chaos, Odysseus stood at the helm, shouting orders to his crew. His voice cut through the storm, commanding discipline and urging his men to hold firm. Yet even as he fought to guide the ship, Odysseus knew that their plight was no ordinary misfortune. The storm bore the unmistakable fury of Poseidon himself. When dawn finally broke, the storm subsided, leaving the men battered but alive. Their ships were scattered, and several were damaged. The once bright spirits of Odysseus's crew had been replaced by fear and uncertainty. They began to question why the gods seemed so intent on punishing them. Their answer came soon enough. After days of drifting, the crew spotted an unfamiliar island. Its rugged cliffs rose high above the sea, and dense forests blanketed its shores. Desperate for food and fresh water, Odysseus decided to investigate. He ordered a group of his strongest men to join him, leaving the rest to guard the ships. The group explored the island, discovering fertile fields and lush pastures. They came upon a cave filled with provisions, cheese, milk, and the carcasses of sheep. It was clear that someone lived here, but there was no sign of the inhabitant. Against his better judgment, Odysseus decided to wait for the owner to return. As night fell, the earth trembled beneath the weight of a massive figure. The cave's owner had returned, and he was no ordinary shepherd. Polyphemus, a towering cyclops with a single eye in the center of his forehead, entered the cave. His monstrous figure blocked the entrance, trapping Odysseus and his men inside. Polyphemus was no kind host. When he noticed the intruders, he roared with rage. "Who are you, to enter my home uninvited?" he bellowed, his voice echoing through the cavern. Odysseus stepped forward, using his cunning to mask his fear. "We are humble travelers, great Polyphemus, seeking shelter and food. We honor the gods and ask for your hospitality." The Cyclops laughed cruelly. "You speak of gods, but I fear no god. Poseidon himself is my father. Your lives are mine to do with as I please." Without warning, Polyphemus snatched 2 of Odysseus's men and devoured them whole. The remaining crew watched in horror, helpless to stop the creature's savage feast. The Cyclops then sealed the entrance with a massive boulder, leaving Odysseus and his men trapped for the night. As the Cyclops slept, Odysseus's men begged him to take action. Some suggested trying to kill the monster in his sleep, but Odysseus knew that even if they succeeded, they would never move the enormous boulder blocking their escape. They needed a plan, and a cunning one at that. The next day, Odysseus approached Polyphemus with a gift, a flask of strong wine they had brought from their last stop. "Great Polyphemus," he said, masking his hatred with false respect, "accept this offering as a token of our gratitude." The Cyclops, intrigued, drank deeply from the flask. The potent wine soon took effect, dulling his senses and making him drowsy. As Polyphemus drifted into a drunken slumber, Odysseus whispered to his men, "Now is our chance." Using a sharpened wooden stake they had prepared, Odysseus and his men drove the weapon into the Cyclops' single eye, blinding him. Polyphemus awoke with a deafening roar, thrashing wildly in his agony. Blinded and enraged, Polyphemus stumbled toward the cave entrance, groping for his attackers. "Who dares to harm me?" he bellowed. Odysseus, ever the trickster, replied, "No one. It was no one who blinded you." Confused, the Cyclops cried out to the other Cyclopes on the island, but when they asked who had attacked him, he could only say, "No one has harmed me." Believing him mad, the others left him to his misery. Seizing the opportunity, Odysseus and his men escaped by clinging to the undersides of Polyphemus's sheep as they were let out to graze. Once safely aboard their ship, Odysseus made a critical mistake. He revealed his identity. "I am Odysseus, king of Ithaca," he shouted. "Remember my name, for it was I who blinded you." Hearing this, Polyphemus called upon his father, Poseidon. "Hear me, mighty Poseidon," he prayed. "Punish Odysseus for his arrogance. Let him never reach his home, or if he must, let him suffer greatly along the way." From that moment on, Poseidon's wrath was absolute. The sea itself became Odysseus's greatest enemy, and his journey home would be a long and arduous one. The land of the Lotus Eaters. Having narrowly escaped the wrath of Polyphemus, the blinded Cyclops, Odysseus and his crew sailed onward. Yet their spirits remained dampened. The sea was no friend, and Poseidon's anger loomed like a shadow. The salty winds carried whispers of further trials ahead, and exhaustion weighed heavily on every man aboard. Despite their survival, Odysseus knew that danger was never far away. After days of treacherous sailing, the crew came upon an unfamiliar land. The island was cloaked in mystery, with rolling hills dotted by strange, fragrant trees. From the distance, it seemed a paradise, a stark contrast to the turbulent waters they had left behind. "Land," cried one of the sailors, his voice cracking with relief. Hope sparked within the men, who yearned for rest, fresh water, and food. To them, this island was a gift from the gods, though Odysseus, ever cautious, harbored doubts. Odysseus ordered the ships to anchor in a sheltered cove. "Let us be careful," he warned. "Appearances can be deceiving. We will explore the island before celebrating." Selecting a small group of his most loyal men, Odysseus ventured into the heart of the land, leaving the rest to guard the ships. As the group delved deeper into the island, the air grew thick with the scent of flowers. Vibrant blossoms of every hue carpeted the land, and streams of crystal-clear water crisscrossed the terrain. In the distance, figures appeared, human in shape but unfamiliar in demeanor. These islanders, known as the Lotus Eaters, welcomed Odysseus and his men with open arms. Their movements were slow and graceful, their voices soft and melodic. They offered no hostility, only gifts, golden fruit unlike any the Greeks had ever seen. The fruit was the lotus, a delicacy unique to the island. Sweet and fragrant, it promised relief from hunger, thirst, and, most dangerously, sorrow. The Lotus Eaters beckoned the crew to partake, smiling with an eerie tranquility. Odysseus hesitated, sensing something unnatural about the people's serenity. But his men, weary and starved, could not resist. One by one, they accepted the fruit, biting into its flesh with abandon. Almost immediately, a change overcame them. Their eyes grew hazy, their movements sluggish, and their expressions blissful yet vacant. "What is this?" Odysseus demanded, his voice sharp with suspicion. One of his men, Elpenor, turned to him with a dreamy smile. "It's wonderful, my lord," he murmured. "I have never felt so free, so at peace. The pain of our journey, the loss of our comrades, it's all gone." Another man, Leota, sank to the ground, cradling a lotus in his hands as though it were a precious treasure. "Why should we return to the sea?" he asked, his voice distant. "Here, there is no suffering. No war. No wrathful gods. Let us stay." Odysseus's heart sank as he watched more of his men succumb to the lotus's allure. It was not mere fruit but a powerful enchantment, stripping its victims of their memories, desires, and ambitions. Those who ate the lotus forgot their homes, their families, and even their identities. They became shadows of themselves, content to waste away in a dreamlike stupor. Realizing the danger, Odysseus sprang into action. "This is no gift, it's a curse," he shouted. He tried to rouse his men, shaking them and calling their names, but they responded with vacant smiles or resisted him entirely. Odysseus knew he had no time to waste. If he delayed, he risked losing his crew to the lotus's spell forever. Summoning his remaining strength, he devised a plan. He would not allow the enchantment to claim them. First, he rallied the few men who had not tasted the fruit. Together, they began dragging the enchanted sailors back toward the ships. It was no easy task, the Lotus Eaters protested weakly, and the bewitched crew members fought back, clinging to the ground and pleading to be left behind. "Please, my lord," one cried. "Why return to suffering when we can have peace here?" Another wailed, "Ithaca is but a distant memory. What is there for us but pain? Let us stay." Odysseus refused to be swayed. His own heart ached to see his men in such a state, but he knew the sweetness of the lotus was a lie, a fleeting comfort that robbed its victims of their humanity. Grasping one man by the shoulders, he growled, you are not yourself. Remember your family, your children who await you in Ithaca. Remember who you are. Though the men remained dazed, Odysseus's words seemed to plant a seed of doubt in their minds. Reluctantly, they allowed themselves to be carried back to the ships. The return to the shore was harrowing. The lotus eaters, while not violent, attempted to block their path, offering more fruit and singing haunting melodies that promised eternal peace. But Odysseus and his unaffected men pressed forward, their determination unyielding. At last, they reached the ships. Odysseus ordered the crew to board and tied the bewitched men to the ship's benches to prevent them from leaping overboard in an attempt to return to the island. He barked commands to raise the sails, and the ships departed the cursed land. As the island faded from view, the enchanted crew members slowly began to regain their senses. They awoke as if from a long dream, confused and ashamed. "Forgive us, my lord," Elpenor said, bowing his head. "We lost ourselves." Odysseus placed a hand on his shoulder. "The fault lies not with you but with the sorcery of that place. Let this be a lesson, we must remain vigilant, for temptation comes in many forms." As the ships sailed onward, Odysseus reflected on the ordeal. The lotus had been a cruel test, one that preyed on the weariness and despair of his men. It had offered an easy escape from suffering, but at the cost of their purpose and identity. Though the crew had survived, Odysseus knew their greatest challenges lay ahead. The gods were far from finished with him, and the path to Ithaca would demand even greater sacrifices. For now, however, they sailed on, their bond stronger than ever, a unity forged in the face of overwhelming odds. Odysseus and his men had escaped the land of the lotus eaters, but the trials of their journey continued. The sea stretched endlessly before them, its waves whispering the name of Poseidon, the god who still sought vengeance. Yet hope stirred as they sighted another island on the horizon, a rugged, mountainous land, promising rest and provisions. The men, weary from their trials, yearned for respite. "Let us anchor here," one of them urged. "Perhaps the gods will show us mercy and allow us a moment's peace." Odysseus, cautious but unable to deny his crew relief, agreed. They guided their ship toward the island, docking near a secluded cove. The air was fragrant with wild herbs, and goats roamed freely across the hills, a clear sign that food and water were abundant. As the crew disembarked, Odysseus gave orders. "Half of you will remain here to guard the ship," he said. "The rest will come with me to explore the land. We will seek out its inhabitants and see if they offer us hospitality, as the laws of Zeus demand." Odysseus selected a dozen of his strongest men and set out, armed with swords and shields. They climbed steep trails and crossed verdant valleys, eventually stumbling upon a vast cave set into the side of a hill. The entrance was enormous, its walls lined with stacks of cheese and rows of milk-filled jars. Sheep and goats of impressive size milled about, bleating softly. The men marveled at the abundance before them. "This must belong to a herdsman of great wealth," one of them said. "Should we take what we need and leave before he returns?" Odysseus shook his head. "No. We will wait and meet the owner. If he is a man of honor, he will share his bounty with us. If not, then we will deal with him as we must." Reluctantly, the men agreed. They built a small fire and settled in to wait. As night fell, the ground began to tremble. A heavy thudding sound echoed through the cave, growing louder with each passing moment. The sheep and goats hurried into the cave, herded by a towering figure, Polyphemus, the Cyclops. Polyphemus was a monstrous being, standing twice the height of any mortal man, with a single, unblinking eye set in the center of his forehead. His shoulders were broad, his limbs thick as tree trunks, and his voice rumbled like thunder. He carried an enormous staff carved from a pine tree and moved with the slow, deliberate steps of a predator. The Cyclops sealed the cave's entrance with a massive boulder, trapping Odysseus and his men inside. Only then did he notice the intruders. "Who are you, to trespass in my home?" he growled, his voice echoing off the cave walls. Odysseus, ever the master of cunning, stepped forward. "Great Polyphemus, we are travelers and warriors returning from the Trojan War. We are weary and seek your hospitality, as Zeus commands all hosts to honor their guests." At the mention of Zeus, Polyphemus sneered. "I fear no god," he spat. "Not Zeus, nor any other. Poseidon, my father, is all the power I need." His massive hand shot out, snatching two of Odysseus's men. Before anyone could react, he crushed their skulls and devoured them whole, washing them down with great gulps of milk. The men recoiled in horror, clutching their weapons, but Odysseus gestured for them to hold back. "We cannot fight him," he whispered. "If we kill him, we'll never move the boulder blocking the entrance. We must wait for an opportunity." For the next 2 days, Polyphemus continued his gruesome feasts, devouring more of Odysseus's men while keeping the rest trapped in the cave. Each night, Odysseus lay awake, devising a plan. On the third evening, he approached the Cyclops with a gift, a skin of strong wine that they had taken from the Cyclades. "Mighty Polyphemus," Odysseus said, hiding his revulsion, "accept this humble offering. It is the finest wine, reserved for kings and heroes." The Cyclops, intrigued, took the wine and drank deeply. Its potency surprised him, and he laughed, a deep, guttural sound. "Delicious," he roared. "What is your name, little man? Tell me, so I may honor you by eating you last." Odysseus's mind raced. "My name is Nobody," he replied with a sly smile. "If you eat me last, I will be honored." Polyphemus drank more of the wine, his movements growing sluggish. Soon, he toppled over, snoring loudly. Seizing the moment, Odysseus signaled to his men. They retrieved a massive wooden stake they had sharpened earlier and heated its tip in the fire. When the stake glowed red-hot, they lifted it together and drove it into the Cyclops' single eye. Polyphemus awoke with a deafening roar, thrashing wildly as he clutched his blinded eye. "Help me, brothers," he cried, stumbling toward the cave's entrance. "Nobody has blinded me." Hearing his cries, the other Cyclopes on the island gathered outside the cave. "If no one has harmed you," they called, "then it must be the will of the gods. We cannot help you." Frustrated and in agony, Polyphemus groped blindly for the men, but Odysseus and his crew stayed just out of reach. They spent the rest of the night preparing for their escape. At dawn, Polyphemus rolled the boulder aside to let his sheep out to graze. Determined to catch the intruders, he felt each animal as it passed, hoping to find a stowaway. But Odysseus, ever resourceful, had tied his men to the undersides of the sheep. Hidden beneath the animals' thick wool, they slipped past the Cyclops undetected. Once free, the crew hurried to their ship. As they rowed away, Odysseus could not resist taunting the blinded Cyclops. "It was not Nobody who blinded you, it was I, Odysseus of Ithaca." Polyphemus, enraged, hurled massive boulders into the sea, narrowly missing the ship. "Hear me, Poseidon," he bellowed. "Punish Odysseus for his arrogance. Let him never see his home again, or if he must, let him suffer every torment before he arrives." Thus, Polyphemus cursed Odysseus, ensuring Poseidon's vengeance would pursue him across the seas. After escaping Polyphemus, Odysseus and his crew arrived at the floating island of Aeolia, ruled by Aeolus, the god of the winds. Aeolus welcomed Odysseus warmly, entertained him for a month, and upon hearing of his plight, offered his aid. Aeolus gifted Odysseus a leather bag containing all the winds, carefully tied to ensure safe passage to Ithaca. For days, the winds propelled their ship smoothly across the sea. Ithaca came into view on the horizon, and joy filled the crew. However, Odysseus, exhausted, fell into a deep sleep. Curiosity overtook his men, who believed the bag held treasures. They opened it, unleashing a storm that drove them far from their homeland. Heartbroken, Odysseus returned to Aeolus to beg for help, but the god, seeing their misfortune as a curse from the gods, refused to intervene again. Their journey brought them to the land of the Laestrygonians, a race of cannibalistic giants. As the fleet anchored in a narrow bay, Odysseus sent scouts to explore. The scouts were seized and devoured by the giants, who then attacked the ships, hurling massive boulders and sinking most of the fleet. Odysseus, with his ship and crew, narrowly escaped, mourning the loss of many comrades. Their numbers dwindled, and despair began to set in. Odysseus landed on Aeaea, the island of the sorceress Circe. Half of the crew, led by Eurylochus, explored the island and found Circe's palace, where they were welcomed with a feast. Unbeknownst to them, Circe had laced the food with a potion that turned them into swine. Eurylochus, who had wisely stayed back, fled to inform Odysseus. Guided by Hermes, who provided him with the magical herb moly to resist Circe's spells, Odysseus confronted the sorceress. He forced her to restore his men to their human forms. Impressed by Odysseus's courage, Circe offered her hospitality. The crew spent a year on her island, recovering and feasting. Finally, Odysseus persuaded Circe to help them continue their journey. She warned him of the dangers ahead, including the Sirens, Scylla, and Charybdis, and advised him to seek the wisdom of the prophet Tiresias in the underworld. Odysseus sailed to the edge of the world, where he performed the necessary rituals to summon the dead. Tiresias appeared, revealing that Poseidon's wrath would continue to plague him. He warned Odysseus not to harm the sacred cattle of Helios on the island of Thrinacia. If they did, his crew would perish, and Odysseus would return to Ithaca alone after years of suffering. Odysseus also spoke with the shades of his mother, Anticlea, who told him of the troubles in Ithaca, and with fallen comrades like Achilles and Agamemnon. Their sorrowful tales weighed heavily on his heart. Following Circe's advice, Odysseus prepared for the Sirens, whose enchanting song lured sailors to their doom. He ordered his men to plug their ears with beeswax and had himself tied to the mast, instructing his crew not to release him no matter how much he begged. As they passed the Sirens, their haunting melodies promised Odysseus knowledge and glory. Struggling against his bonds, he yearned to go to them, but his loyal crew held firm. Once out of earshot, Odysseus was freed, grateful for his men's obedience. The ship approached the strait where the monstrous Scylla and the whirlpool Charybdis awaited. Circe had advised Odysseus to sail closer to Scylla, as losing a few men was preferable to risking the entire ship. As they passed, Scylla's 6 heads snatched 6 sailors from the deck. The crew, horrified but powerless, rowed on, mourning their lost comrades. Charybdis roared nearby, but they managed to steer clear of its deadly pull. Despite Tiresias's warning, the crew insisted on landing on Thrinacia, the island of Helios, to rest. Odysseus made them swear not to harm the sacred cattle, but when unfavorable winds stranded them for a month, hunger drove the men to slaughter the livestock. Helios, enraged, demanded vengeance from Zeus, who struck their ship with a thunderbolt as they departed. The ship sank, and all but Odysseus perished. Clinging to a piece of wreckage, he drifted to the island of Ogygia. Odysseus spent 7 years on Ogygia, held captive by the nymph Calypso, who offered him immortality if he stayed. Though tempted, Odysseus longed for Ithaca and his family. Eventually, the gods intervened, and Hermes ordered Calypso to release him. She reluctantly complied, helping him build a raft to continue his journey. Odysseus's raft was wrecked by Poseidon near Scheria, the land of the Phaeacians. Exhausted, he was found by Nausicaa, the king's daughter, who brought him to her father, King Alcinous. The Phaeacians welcomed Odysseus and provided him with a ship to finally return home. Odysseus reached Ithaca at last, but his trials were not over. Disguised as a beggar with Athena's help, he observed the suitors who had overrun his palace, vying for Penelope's hand. Revealing himself only to his son, Telemachus, and a few loyal servants, Odysseus devised a plan. Penelope unknowingly delayed the suitors with a clever ruse, promising to choose a husband once she finished weaving a shroud, a task she unraveled each night. At a feast, Odysseus, still in disguise, participated in an archery contest. Using his great bow, he proved his identity by effortlessly stringing it and shooting an arrow through 12 axe heads. Odysseus revealed himself, and with Telemachus's aid, he slew the suitors, reclaiming his home. Penelope, cautious after years of deception, tested Odysseus by asking him to move their bed, a feat impossible since it was built into a living olive tree. When Odysseus described the bed's immovability, Penelope knew he was truly her husband. Reunited at last, they embraced, and peace returned to Ithaca. This epic tale spans Odysseus's decade-long struggle, showcasing themes of resilience, cunning, and the enduring power of love and loyalty.